I started my coaching career transformational. But also has a great side for I did teaching skills. Teaching. I can't go to finding a place to teach. Drifting back in and out.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Whoever was that you who just said, oh, there she is. Here I am. Hello. Okay. So I'm thrilled to see you all, some of you back here. Is anyone here at Alembic for the first time for this tonight? Wonderful. Welcome. How many of you are Enneagram enthusiasts? Heck yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Glad you're here. For those of you who haven't been here before or who haven't had me tell you what an alembic is, we're going to do that now. I'm going to tell you what an alembic is. So how many of you don't know what an alembic is? So an alembic is a sacred container. It was invented by a female alchemist named Mary. And alchemy, as some of you may know, dates from a time when science and spiritual practice and magic were not differentiated the way that they are now. And the alchemists believed that the substance you put inside the alembic would not transform unless conditions in the world were set up correctly. So that's kind of the materialistic scientific part. But you also had to set up conditions in your mind correctly. And only then, when all of that came together, would the substance in the alembic transform. So an alembic is a place where mind and matter meet to transform. And that is our aspiration for this space. And that's what we've been doing here for the last 3 years, just about. We're coming up on our 3-year anniversary in a few weeks. And the idea of this space is that we, as a group, we kind of curate and provide a wide variety of teachings and practice and little weird bits of knowledge we found in a tree somewhere. But all of it is presented to you by people who are deep experts in the subject matter that they're offering to you. And the idea is that all of you can come and try a lot of different things. And when you find the thing that you get really excited about, you can go really deep with it. And then if you pop out of that, it's okay to graduate from a spiritual technique. You can try more than one thing. So when you pop out of that, you're still kind of held in the wider community of the Alembic. So that's a little bit about what we're up to here. And there are a few things coming up that you may want to know about. One is that on this Sunday, not tonight, but this Sunday, we are having a kirtan. And Chandra Easton teaches here every Tuesday night. And every now and then she will do an extended kind of period of chanting with a harmonium that she plays. And it is, just to use like a very spiritual term, like bonkers amazing. It's really good. So we have enticed her to do a longer kirtan. So that's going to be this Sunday. It starts at what time? It's in the early evening, at some point. Emily, do you know? 6:30? What time is kirtan? Amazing. Okay, 6:30. And it's going to be just a really sweet event. Chandra is incredible. She holds a very powerful space, and it's a very sweet practice. So if you've never done kirtan before, also, this is like a good place to start. There's no like fancy mudras you need to know. If you don't know the words, there's a sheet. If you get overwhelmed and you're like, oh my God, I hate this, you could go out and have a cup of tea. Like, it's a very low pressure kirtan. And it's also the first one that we've done with her. So if you want to ever say you were at kirtan since the beginning, this is your chance. Okay. So everyone's going to be a beginner on Sunday, including you, if you are a beginner. Then we have David Odoricio will be here next Friday and Saturday. So he was here a few months ago, and he did a talk on Thomas Merton and contemplative Christianity in California, and also gave this like really interesting short talk about at the end of Thomas Merton's life when he got into Dzogchen, which I personally had not known that, and it was very cool. And David is like a real scholar with all the credentials and everything, but he is clearly just a very curious, bright-eyed person who loves this stuff. And so we basically just would not shut up about how much we wanted him to come back, so he is. And on Friday, he's doing a thing on psychedelic Christianity. So that is next Friday, psychedelic Christianity, because it's about time for that. And then if you want to just like get some eyes on this guy, you can come on Friday and see what he's about. And then on Saturday, he's doing a full day, 10 a.m. to 4 on, it's called Alchemy of Mind, Alembic of the Heart. So he knows he's pandering a little bit. He knows his audience. Sufi mystics meet Christian monks. Okay, so Sufism and Christianity. So come for the psychedelics, stay for the Sufism. So that's this Sunday and then Friday and Saturday of next week. So if you're not doing anything, come to those things. If you've got plans next Friday, like cancel them, come here instead. It's gonna be amazing. I'm actually I'm supposed to be somewhere and I'm flying back Friday for that, like for real. So highly recommend it. Voting with my feet. All right, logistics for tonight. We're gonna go straight through. This goes from 7 to 9, okay? We're gonna go straight through. We're gonna start with a period of practice that's about like 20, 30 minutes. And then we're gonna have the talk portion of the evening. We're not gonna take like a 10-minute break in the middle because those often turn into like 20-minute breaks and we've got to round y'all up from the parking lot. And so we're gonna just go straight through. But if you would like to have a cup of tea, if you have to go to the bathroom, you do not have to raise your hand and ask Tina if it's okay. You can just go. Preference for staying seated during the meditation, but if it's like an emergency, don't, go. We are also live streaming this evening. So if this is going onto the internet can see Tina and the internet can hear Tina and me right now. You're welcome, internet. But But if your voice does not go through a microphone, it doesn't go onto the internet. So if you have a question that feels like a little more sensitive or more vulnerable, just don't say it into a microphone. The internet will not hear you. You can have tea in here, but you cannot spill your tea in here. Those are the rules. Okay, does anyone have questions about logistics or anything else about kind of like how the evening is going to go? Okay, cool. So reading Tina's book a few years ago, well, maybe actually it was more than a few years ago now, but reading Tina's book expanded my awareness of what is possible in meditation and what the mind can do. It also expanded my sense of how much of a badass one single person can be. So Tina's practice is deep and impressive. And it's really, just speaking personally, it's a thrill and an honor to have her here with us tonight. And I'm going to say one more personal thing, which is I think the development of the awareness end of the practice and the psychological end of the practice is really important to do in parallel. And Tina is representing that, I think, in a way that has a lot of integrity and interestingness. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here tonight and to have Tina here with us. So please join me in welcoming Tina Rasmussen.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so, wow, full house. It's a joy to be here. This is the first time I've been here at night. So I did my first weekend here in January, and we already have more events planned coming up. So it's nice to be with you all here at the beginning of that. I have just a few announcements. I'm not really going to say much about myself. If you want to know more about me, you can check out my website at luminousmindsangha.com. I've been teaching for about 20 years, and that's probably enough. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I have a sign-up sheet out there. I only send it out 6 times a year, and it has new free talks and YouTubes and other things on it. And I also have my events out there on a flyer that's in a little plastic thing. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the Enneagram, and this is really exciting because, well, for lots of reasons, but when I was here doing the weekend in January, people were so excited about, weaving the Enneagram and the personality work into their practice on the cushion. Really, how do we work with what we're seeing on the cushion in a skillful way in our lives off the cushion, both the transcendent things, the places where we're in touch with our deeper nature, but also the personality material that comes up. And unfortunately, in a lot of the traditional lineages in Buddhism, that's where I come from, is Buddhism mostly. It's not been, we didn't have psychology 2,000 years ago, 2,600 years ago. We didn't have what we have in just the last 100 years of psychology and really understanding the mechanics of the psyche and how it all works. So we have an opportunity in our lifetime to really work with that material in a much more skillful way. And so the Enneagram is one tool that I think is really helpful for that can really save us a lot of time and be somewhat of a shortcut, but also give us more depth in how we're working with both the things in our personality that cause suffering, as well as the gifts we bring to the world, to really see the gifts and be able to appreciate them and value our own uniqueness. And the Enneagram is a great tool for both of those. So that's what I'll be talking about tonight. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So we're going to start with a sitting, and what I'd like you to do in the sitting is a little bit of, it relates to the topic. So we'll do mindfulness of breathing. So wherever you want to notice the breath, it could be at the belly, could be the chest, could be in this area that we use in samatha between the upper lip and the nostril, just whatever's easiest for you. But notice when, so what we're doing with this practice is we're being with the object, which is the breath, and we're bringing our attention there if we go off. So you're going to go off many times. This is normal. This is going to happen to everyone in the room. So when that happens, what I'm going to ask you to do is just notice, like, is there a pattern to it? Like, maybe you're going off several times. I'll just make up a pattern that's common for people, rehearsing a conversation. So we all have about 3 to 5 patterns. Really, there hasn't been anybody I've worked with where there's really been more. The contents change, like what conversation is being rehearsed will change, but it's the pattern that doesn't change. Or maybe fantasizing is a pattern, or worrying, or self-criticism. So I'm just giving you a few examples, but just notice, if you can, with 1 or 2 words, what that is, and then come back to the breath. And you might start seeing that there's really not that many different patterns. And this all becomes helpful when we start working with the personality material and also with the Enneagram. So I thought, let's start in the sitting. Let's start right away with working with this. Okay? So any questions about the meditation? We'll sit for about 25 minutes. And I'll ring the bell at the end. Okay. So find a comfortable posture. The main thing with posture is to be upright. I mean, we don't need to be military straight, but to have a sense of aliveness in our posture so that we're not, encouraging sleepiness. But then also to have a sense of relaxation. So the posture doesn't have to be perfect, but we do want to have both of those elements to it. And then bringing your attention to the breath, wherever it's easiest to notice for you. It could be the belly, or the chest, or the area around between the upper lip and the nostril. Any of those are fine. And when you find that your attention has wandered off, just bring it back to the breath without judging yourself, with kindness, with gentleness towards yourself, and just be glad that you noticed. And then as a part of that, if you notice the pattern that's taking you off, that would be an extra thing to do for our time tonight. And I might do a reminder somewhere in the middle, and I'll ring the bell at the end. Notice where your attention is now, and if it's wandered off the breath, notice what the pattern was, and then come back to the breath with gentleness and kindness towards yourself. Just letting yourself settle there as best you can, and coming back as many times as necessary. Okay, so if you did notice any patterns, just make a little mental note of that, and it'll be useful to have something to actually, apply to what I'm going to be saying. So what I'm going to do actually is have everyone stand up for just a minute, and we're going to do just a minute of Qigong, okay, since we're going to be sitting. So the first one is just the shake. So just go ahead and just let your body shake out a little bit. Okay. All right. And then we'll just do one more, which is the three breaths. We'll do it 3 times though. So I'll just show you. So that's what you're going to do. Okay. Ready? Okay. So just to give you a little bit of background, my teaching really has kind of three legs of the stool, if you want to look at it that way. Buddhism is really the one I teach the most about, as sort of the foundation, both Theravadan and Tibetan Buddhism. And then another one is the diamond approach. So how many of you have heard of the diamond approach? Yeah, so it's a modern path that really the main thing to know about it for this is that it integrates the psychological and the spiritual in one continuum, rather than having them be separate. It really sees them as kind of part of the same process. And then the third leg of the stool is psychology. So I have a PhD in a psychology-related field, and I worked with, before I was a Buddhist teacher, I worked with leaders who were committed to humanistic values in the business world, and got to see a lot about what helps people learn and grow. And so I'm going to start tonight talking about the Buddhist angle on this. And actually, if you see this diagram here, this is a diagram of the Enneagram. And in the middle, you can see there's a triangle. So that triangle, when I get to the Enneagram, relates to Buddhism. So it's kind of cool that Buddhism is right there, even though the Enneagram is not from Buddhism at all. So how does Buddhism then see this whole idea of working with the personality? And the way that I see practice, both on and off the cushion, but especially on, is that when you're meditating, at any one time, one of 2 things is happening the whole time you're meditating, either transformation or transcendence. So transformation, what I mean by that is that you're trying to be with the breath like we were tonight. It's a single object. It's not always that easy to be with. And you're finding that you're being pulled off by psychological material and having to come back. So that's the transformation part, is working with those patterns that are pulling us off. And they are, and I'm not using this word judgmentally, but they're compulsive. Compulsive just means that you can't not do it. So we're trying to be with the breath, and we can't not go to the pattern. So it's compulsive. So what's going on with that? Well, what you're seeing, the cool thing about meditation, well, one of many hundreds of cool things, is that you're seeing the building blocks of your ego self. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing the patterns. We know that, the average adult in a, country like ours has 80 to 90,000 thoughts a day. So those are deep grooves. And the scariest thing about those is that 80 to 90% of those are the same thoughts we had yesterday and last month and last year and 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So you're seeing the grooves in your consciousness that are going all day long. It's only when you meditate that you see them. So seeing them is a really good thing, because they're controlling us. They're making us feel certain ways. They're, in Buddhism, really what we're trying to see if we can be freer from is the suffering that they cause. So the transformation side is when that's happening, and just that act of coming back from whatever's taking us off to our object that's weakening it a little bit. So there are other, what I'm going to talk about, like with working with the material and the Enneagram, that makes that process go faster. The other thing that can happen when we're meditating is transcendence. That's what we all want. We all want to be able to sit there and have the whole meditation be blissful the whole time. And, and that is one of the fruits of the practice of the times when even it's just peaceful for 5 or 10 seconds or, a minute. Those are the things that really, nourish us. And then there's the potential to know our deeper nature that's even beyond the personality, beyond, our human self. And that's transcendence. So whenever you're meditating, one of those two things is happening, and they're both leading to the potential of both of them is to thin what I call have thinning of the me. So they both thin the me in different ways, and that really is what leads to the potential of freedom and of really living from a place where there's a whole lot less suffering. So in Buddhism then, how do we work with ourselves skillfully? And there's a really well-known Buddhist scholar named Bhikkhu Bodhi, and he has a great article called Taking Stock of Oneself. But really the idea is that to have an honest self-assessment of really what's going on with us. Where are we suffering? Where do we get caught up? Where do we get triggered? Where do we give in and comply? Where do we, if you look at the 4, I'm now using 4 trauma responses: fight, where do we get angry? Flight, where do we freeze and hide? Freeze, where do we just get stuck? And appease, where do we cave when we really, it's not our truth? So, taking stock of ourselves and really being honest with ourselves about our practice and our psychology really helps on the path, because if we're not doing that, we're not working with accurate information. So the transcendence isn't really enough. We're the way that these things have been worked with historically in most traditions, including Buddhism, but really around the world, almost all of them used monasticism and renunciation. We just separate from the world and we don't own things, we don't have sex or families. And now the other monastics are our tribe, and that's how we're going to sort of contain it. But we're householders. We're going to get triggered all the time by our jobs, by a boss that isn't very understanding, by financial problems, by, relationship issues, parenting, aging, all of these things, financial worries. All of these things are add a lot of complexity to our life. So we really need to work with the personality material more directly if we're going to be able to navigate that level of complexity in our lives. That monastics, they still had all this stuff too, but it was simpler. Like when you're on retreat, things are made simpler so that you can focus on practice. But being householders, we can be out there and really use this to accelerate our deepening if we are using those things skillfully. So gaining space from the patterns is really the beginning of having both freedom and understanding. So like, say a person's triggered, say they're angry, just as an example. Something happens. Like I was driving here. I'm not sure what happened, but somebody started honking at me like really loudly. I didn't even know where they were coming from. Well, I didn't get over into the other lane fast enough, And so this person was honking and honking, okay, so I'll get over. And then they had to zoom over and cut a few people off and stuff. People end up dead because of this. There was a woman in San Rafael a few years ago, a pregnant woman who was shot just out driving somewhere, and there was a road rage incident. She was murdered. So that's the level of identification. We wouldn't do that, but that's the level of identification people have with their patterning. So like if somebody realizes that they get triggered and anger is the response, for example, or even if you're just seeing it inside, that there's like angry remembering, rehashing something, and anger is a pattern that you have. Like, take the judgment off, first of all. And then just being able to say, oh, that's the anger pattern. All of a sudden, we're not identified with it anymore. We've got some space from it, so now we're disidentified. And in that space, there's the potential to not act it out. We're going to still feel it. That's part of the digesting of the personality material. But if we aren't identified, we're suffering less. We can start understanding, where is this coming from? What's it doing for me? Why is it there? And it starts thinning. And we're also not acting things out so we can have more wisdom. At least the potential is there for more wisdom in our actions from disidentifying from these things. And over time, when we really start seeing the patterns, usually we can go back and see how this was necessary in our early upbringing. I'll talk about, like, how does the ego get formed, and what's going on with that. So a healthy ego isn't the end point, as it is like in psychology. Often in transpersonal psychology, this isn't true, but in regular therapy and psychology, having a healthy ego is kind of the goal. That's the end point. And it is worthwhile, because we're going to function better and we're going to suffer less having that. But on the spiritual path, that is just a stage. And there's the potential to really go beyond that, to know our nature that is beyond the body and beyond the personality, that is that's indestructible. I mean, this is the ground that is manifesting you sitting here right now. That ground has been you every second of your life. So the potential is to actually know that directly in such a way that gives us a sense of peace and sacredness, really, in our lives, that goes beyond the body and the personality. And at the same time, the physical world is beautiful, and we want to be able to interact with it in a way that we can contribute and enjoy it. And so doing this work is good for both of those things. But the healthy ego isn't the end of the journey. And, digesting and transmuting the personality material really allows us to not to lower that compulsion. So whatever's happening on the cushion, that same thing is happening off the cushion all day long. So by thinning out the compulsiveness, we can always go back to the pattern. Like, if we want to be angry, we can. It's not going to go away. All we're doing is adding more options so that the compulsiveness is reduced. And also, like, something like anger is a really interesting one, because when I started working with myself and others, it's like, somebody asked me once at a retreat, why would somebody want to be angry? And I thought, that's a good question. But if you really feel into anger, it kind of feels good, because there's a self-righteousness. I'm right, you're wrong. There's an energy to it. And really what anger is doing in particular, anger is a distortion of strength. So when we feel helpless, when we feel, disempowered, anger is a way that we can reclaim that, even if we can't do anything about the situation. So, but it's a distortion. And if we really feel it, at first it feels kind of good, but then if we feel under it, we can actually feel that there's a toxicity in our consciousness in it that strength doesn't have. Strength feels clean. So that's really where these things start turning into suffering, as it's known in Buddhism. And then the last thing, two more things about Buddhist psychology. One is that if our only motivation for practice is the transcendence, I talked about that as being when things are going smoothly and we're knowing maybe some parts of our deeper nature, it's peaceful or blissful. If that's our only motivation and we don't have a good sitting, or we go to have a retreat and it's difficult, it's going to be easy to fall off the path. If we don't see that the working with the personality material is equally as important and valid to our freedom, it's easy to get discouraged because we're going to have to slog through that stuff a lot. But if we can work with that material skillfully and we start seeing it, then that is hugely motivating, even if we don't have a good sitting, because we start seeing this is actually thinning out. And I've seen this, I've been teaching 18 years now. I haven't had a single person who's been practicing for a number of years, like 2 or 3 years or more, who doesn't look at their life and say, my life's better. I've never found anybody. It might not be as much better as they want it to, it might not be going as fast as they want it to, but there is the potential for this thinning, especially if we are seeing not just the transcendent as the reason why we're practicing, but also the transformation of the personality material. So in Buddhism, this is framed as what's taking us off of our object is called hindrances and defilements. So you can see these words are kind of negative, so I just call them personality patterns. It's a lot more neutral and also I think more descriptive. But they're called that because they're taking us off the meditation. They're hindering us, or they're in our consciousness. They're things that cause suffering. So in that way, the word defilement's really pointing to the fact that these things are making us suffer. They're veiling our deeper nature. So the main 3 that relate to the Enneagram are, in the old days, they were called greed, hatred, and ignorance, but I prefer the term delusion. So delusion is when we're kind of like falling asleep on ourselves. It's kind of nice to just have it be fuzzy and not really know about that conversation that you need to have, but you've been hoping you'll never have to have, or that thing in our lives that we really wish wasn't there and we're just don't want to attend to it, or, doom scrolling, or binging TV so we don't have to actually be present. All of these things are ways that delusion can creep in on the cushion. Unless we're actually tired, sleepiness is a way that we can see that. I mean, a lot of people are sleep deprived, so that's something different. But delusion is the primary defilement that we all have. It's our turn away from the ground of being. And that is the delusion that really is at the foundation of all of our suffering. And then the next is aversion. So what's aversion? Aversion is when something we don't like is happening, and if I could just get rid of that thing, then my life would be good. So this is when we're meditating and we're seeing that the angry, remembering, or the judging, or the hatreds is different than anger. So anger is more like hot, more like I want to, punch that person. Hatred is the cold shoulder. That's I'm ghosting them. It's cold. And then another aspect of aversion is fear. So anxiety, worrying, all of those things. We're kind of dwelling on something that we want to get rid of that isn't good, and it's coming out in these different ways. So it's really about pushing something away. And then the last of the core 3 defilements is desire. So this is when, if I could just get that thing, then my life would be good. So this would be, patterns, fantasizing, planning your vacation, things like that are really about wanting. And there's more of a feeling of if I could just get that, then everything would be good. But, we see that what happens, it's fine to want things. That's part of being human. It's not saying that that isn't part of life, just the way that having fear is a part of life. But why is it happening on the cushion? It's the compulsiveness that we're talking about. So desire, the thing about desire is that if it's part of our core patterning that's causing the ego self to keep never being satisfied, when we have the thing we want, there may be satisfaction for a while, but within a fairly short amount of time, it's like, well, that's over. Now what? What's next? And the me is just a doing machine. So if that is what is driving us, there's never going to be enough. It's the desire itself as a compulsion that's the problem, because even when we get the thing, now there's another thing we have to get. So it's a mouse wheel. Okay, so that's Buddhism. Now, what about the Enneagram? So we have this diagram here, and this is the diagram of the Enneagram. So a few things about the Enneagram. How many of you know something about the Enneagram? Most of you. Okay, so the origins of the Enneagram are shrouded in mystery. It's thought that it comes from a group called the Sarmoon Brotherhood that was in the Middle East. The White Brotherhood came through people like Gurdjieff, and then got handed down to some modern teachers like Oscar Ichazo and Sandra Maitre, who's been a teacher of mine for 18 years in the Diamond Approach, Hamid Ali, others. And now it's, there's a lot of Enneagram teachers out there. But it was originally, its purpose was as a tool for liberation from the ego self. So it was a tool for liberation on the spiritual path that helped us see, and that helps us see how we've turned away from our deeper nature and replace that with the ego self that is going to be our refuge, basically. Instead of the grounded being our refuge, the me becomes the refuge. So the Enneagram is a set of 9 different patterns, 9 different ways of turning away from our deeper nature and identifying with the body and the ego self. So if we can determine which Enneatype we are, and I'll get to that, like what my suggestions would be if you aren't sure what your Enneatype is, or if you want to explore it more, I'll give suggestions. But once we have landed on that and feel pretty clear about it, I've been using the Enneagram for 30 years myself, and it took me a while to really land on my Enneatype, but it continues even now to give me insights, new insights or deeper insights after all those years. And now that I've worked with, I don't know, probably thousands of people. I used to use this when I worked in the business world. I didn't ask these leaders what their Enneatype was, but I could tell what it was. And then if I started working with them based on that, I found that my results got accelerated. And they thought I was psychic, Well, I'm not saying I'm not psychic, but it was useful. I could see how useful it was. Even when they didn't even know that I was using it, it was useful. And now that I've been working, like I have a year-long mentoring program, and month 2 is on, your personality and understanding that. And when I first started doing the mentoring program, almost everything in it is Buddhist. Now there's more things that aren't Buddhist, but I thought, oh, should I include the Enneagram? Maybe, it was mostly Buddhists that were coming to the mentoring program. And I thought they might object to that. So at the end, the first 3 times I did surveys. And what was the thing people liked the most? The Enneagram, So, it really, it's super useful. for really understanding ourselves and having insights that we might not have seen otherwise. And it's very sophisticated. So I started working with it before I was in the Diamond Approach, but it is part of the teaching of the Diamond Approach. And the teacher that I've had in the Diamond Approach for most of the 18 years is Sandra Maitre, who's one of the well-known Diamond Approach teachers out there. So I've gotten to see I'm in a group that's been between like 50 and 70 people. And we used to, the first few years that I was in it, we would get into groups by Enneatype with other people of our same Enneatype. And then we would do exercises and report out. So we got to see all the other groups reporting out. And now I know these people are like my family. So, I've seen like 6 or 8 people of every Enneatype and what they're like and how different Enneatypes show up on different people. And it's amazing. It's really amazing to see, like, when you find that consistent thread, especially for yourself, how accurate and how useful it is to be able to work with that. So different teachers have a different take on the Enneagram, and I really recommend, since this is for the spiritual path, going to, if you're going to read books or go to websites of teachers, to go to ones that are using it as a tool for being freed from the ego self. Some teachers, the way they talk about it is just actually reinforcing and reifying the ego self. So, I'm not trying to sound negative about certain teachers, but it is important to be conscious of that, because that's not helping us on the spiritual path, just being more identified. So it's like, well, I'm a blah, blah, so that's how I am. This isn't helping us be free. This is just getting more entrenched into it. So this is just a word of warning. The other thing is that, if you go and look online or read books about what you think is your Enneatype, it's not going to be 100% of what is in that Enneatype that's going to be accurate, because there's a lot of subtleties, and I'll just touch on some of those tonight. But if it's overall feels accurate, what I encourage people to do is try it on for a while. If you're not sure what your type is, try it on for a few months and see if it's making sense and you're having insights based on that. That's a good way to really land in a particular Enneatype. Okay, so anything else about the origins? Yeah, so, the Sarmoon Brotherhood is where it supposedly came from. They were kind of in the Sufi zone, sort of, in the Middle East, and that's been sort of lost to obscurity, but really the use of it as a tool, it's like in Dzogchen, they talk about using the practice of Dzogchen. It's like you use a thorn to take the thorn out. So the Enneagram is like a tool you're using, a tool about the ego self that you're using to liberate yourself from the ego self. So the diagram, then, I'm going to go through the inner triangle and just give you a sense of how did the ego self form and what's going on with that? I mean, were we just made to suffer and die, and that's the whole point of human existence? Or is there more to the story than that? And in my experience and understanding, and the way that it's understood in some traditions, like I said, the ego self it's a stage. So it's not the end point of the potential for us as humans, but it's a stage that we need in order to have self-reflective consciousness, and then to go beyond that so that we can actually know our deeper nature. As far as we know, there may be other creatures on the planet who have self-reflection, like whales and the great apes, of which basically that's what we are, dolphins, dogs, elephants. Maybe at some point we'll know because we can understand their language. But as far as we know, we're the only ones that we can verify have self-reflection. And because we can know what we're knowing, we can know that we are a deeper nature. We can know that we are the ground of being. And for that, we have to have the self-reflection of the ego self. So it's basically like a scaffolding that can eventually come down if we go farther on the path of liberation. So it starts at the top with the 9 Enneatype, and the 9 is the mediator, the peacemaker, and that the core personality pattern of the 9 is delusion. So that is the core delusion, both in Buddhism and in the Enneagram, of our turn away from our deeper nature and our identification with the body and with the me, basically. As we come into the physical realm, we need a body. We have to have a body to have a human experience. So bodies are good. And through the development of the ego self, that gets identified with the body. So that's what we think we are. But that's not the end of the story. So this is really the first turn away from the ground of being. And what happens as an infant is that an infant comes in and consciousness is like affixed to a body, but an infant, a newborn, doesn't know separation. A newborn infant is basically like animals who are their deeper nature, but they don't know it. They don't have the self-reflection other than some of the animals that I mentioned. So that's how we all are as an infant. And then what happens is we're basically merged with our caregivers. And what happens is as we need things, we need food, that hurts, there's hunger, diapers need changing, have to go to the bathroom, need picking up and holding by the caregivers. The infant starts getting that there are these things are unpleasant, and the good stuff is coming from out there. All the solutions are coming from out there, and there seems to be a sensation happening here, and the good stuff's coming from there, so I must be separate. So this is how the identification with the body and the sense of duality with the caregiver, the parents usually, starts happening. And around the age of 2, this is the terrible 2s, where before then, if you say, I'm going to the grocery store, they don't know what you mean. They don't know what I means. You have to say, mommy's going to the grocery store, daddy's going. So around 2, the me starts forming. And they start saying, me do it, and they start getting, I'm separate. And now I'm going to run around all over the place and run away from mom and dad. But they start falling down and hurting themselves. And then they look around and there's no caregiver and they're traumatized. Or maybe the food doesn't come in a timely way, or they hurt themselves. So that's where then you go down to point 6, and here's the loyal skeptic. Point 6, really the core there is fear. So what happens to us as around the age 3, 4, 5, we start getting, this thing is really vulnerable. It's easily damaged and it needs constant feeding and watering and, all this stuff. And so fear sets in that I am vulnerable here. And I'm not always going to get everything I need, and this isn't very safe. So going over to point 3, the performer, I got to do it. If I'm going to be okay, I better do it the best I possibly can, because no one's going to take care of it but me. And now you have a fully developed ego self. So this is really the whole turn away from the ground of being and the identification with the body and the personality. Does that make sense? So this is it. This is what's happened to all of us. So, the potential on the spiritual path is that we can, using various spiritual technologies, start rediscovering our deeper nature and not that the ego was a mistake or was bad or wrong or anything. We're not here to kill it. We're here to really digest it and open it up and understand, why are those patterns there? Have they served us in our family of origin mostly and society? What have they done for us? And can we now go beyond that to where they're not compulsive? We'll still be able to go back to these patterns, planning or whatever the patterns are. They're always there to go back to, but they're blocking our deeper nature. So that is the inner triangle of the Enneagram. And basically there you have delusion, aversion, and then over at the 3 is desire. So the middle of this diagram really has the core patterns of Buddhism right in it, which I just love, because this tradition, the two traditions aren't related in any way, but they both saw something really important there about, those 3 are really the core of Buddhist psychology, of understanding our how we suffer and how we get identified. So there's 9 types then, as you can see from the numbers. And I won't go into each Enneatype tonight. What I would suggest is that if you don't know your Enneatype, the best tool I found to get a sense of like your top 3 possibilities, and everyone I've worked with over a long time has been in the top 3 on this Enneagram test. I think it's like $13 or $15. It's on the Enneagram Institute website. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but it's fairly short and it's online. You can do it, and it'll give you reports for the different types, and to read that and see what lands with you, I think, is the best starting point for understanding your Enneatype. So once a person knows their Enneatype, so I'll just show you a couple of things here. So the top, these 3 are considered, these 3 are the belly center Enneatypes, 8, 9, and 1. These are the heart-based, and then these are the head-based. So that's one way of understanding kind of the quadrants or the triads. And then you'll also see that there are lines. So what are the lines with the arrows? So what does that mean? Well, first, I'll just say that when a person has landed with what their core Enneatype is, and this is important, the Enneagram understanding that I believe is true and that I've worked with and feel is most useful is that we come in with our Enneatype. And I've worked with other tools in the business world, the Myers-Briggs and so on. They feel the same thing. This is a combination of, if you believe in rebirth karma or just the mystery. And then our environment also shapes that. But you can see that if you have more than one kid or if you have siblings, the same environment shapes different people differently. So you can see, even with an infant, you can see that these 2 infants aren't the same. We come in with stuff. So there's nature, the nature of the person, then there's the nurture, the environment that shapes it. And it's so interesting because some of the Enneatypes, I've seen this with people, not all of them are like this, but there's even a family of origin kind of pattern, like this Enneatype had a difficult relationship with the father, and this one had a difficult one with the mother. This one didn't have much connection anywhere. This one had a good one with the mother. This one had, stuff like that. So that's not 100% accurate, but it's fascinating to see that it is often accurate, So it's a combination, but really it's not like, well, I'm these 3 Enneatypes. That's not how it works. The way this is useful is to really feel like you've landed in one that you feel is accurate for yourself, because that is what's going to help you understand how to free yourself. It doesn't help you free yourself if you think you're 5 different Enneatypes. You know, that's not how the tool is designed. So at first, it may take a little bit of work to feel like you've landed in one. How many of you feel like you know what your Enneatype is? Okay, good. So that's a lot of people. So anyway, that really tells us what our core, there's a few different ways of looking at it, but the core of how we've replaced the ground of being as what we are, as our refuge, as our home base, as our ultimate nature, with the me and doing. So if I do this thing, I'm going to be valued for this thing, and then I'm going to be safe. That's kind of what the Enneatype is telling us. So different Enneatypes have different things that are there. It's called fixation, but it's a way of like we've replaced the grounded being with that. So that is really useful to know. That is super useful. And what I found, another thing that I found that's really interesting over the years, I keep learning more and more, is that as people start getting more freedom, like using the Buddhist tools, which I believe the Buddhist tools are the best spiritual technologies out there for realizing the transcendent. I think Hinduism has good things. Every tradition has good things, but the Buddhist meditation tools and other practices are, to me, really effective at realizing the transcendent. Psychology and some of the tools from the diamond approach, this being one, are the best for the transformation. Because the traditions that have been around for thousands of years, they didn't have psychology. You know, we've got that. So let's make the most of it. So anyway, the fixation is really how we feel that if I do this thing, I will have value, and then I will be safe, and that is my identity. That is who I am. So you can imagine on the spiritual path, if we think that's who we are, that's going to block something like awakening. Because with awakening, we're the grounded being. We're a human with an Enneatype, but really we're the grounded being. And I have this way of kind of giving you a visual on this. So this is how we normally see reality. That, you know, I'm here and you're here and the person in front of you is here and the flip chart's here, and they're all separate. And from this perspective, that isn't false. It's not untrue. But if I take the veil of the personality away, there's a deeper reality there. So, you know, the hand is more fundamental than the fingers. And if I do this, you know, where does my finger really end? I can still feel that finger down here, but from here, it's not separate from these other fingers. And this is more fundamental. If a finger wasn't there, the hand would still be there. So this is the personality and the body and the physical realm where things appear separate, and there's a truth to that. I mean, when this body dies, that body isn't going to die. So, you know, the Buddha and Ananda weren't having the same experience. So there is a reality of individuality, but from here, that doesn't mean that there has to be a perception of separation. From down here, our consciousness, your consciousness that's manifesting you right now, is emanating from the grounded being, from the mystery. It's been there every second of your life. So on the spiritual path, we have the chance to know that that's what we are. And when the body dies, Will this continue? Well, is there something that is indestructible? And we can know that on the path, we can know that directly. That's what the Buddha was pointing to. But if I'm identified with, type 1 being the perfectionist or the reformer, it's called in some descriptions, that Enneatype is really about making the world better and noticing what isn't quite right and improving it. And that's a wonderful thing. I have anyway, I won't get into stories yet, but that is a gift to the world, that there are people who have that and who want to do that. And yet for that person, if this turns into seeing everything as flawed, and now I'm suffering all the time because all I can see is how flawed everything is. And not only that, but I'm pissed about it too. And I'm going to tell people what's wrong, So, that's where the suffering starts coming in, of losing touch with the ground that actually is perfect, even with the imperfections. When we are in touch with our deeper nature, we know that there's a perfection that goes beyond the physical realm. But if somebody's identified, say somebody has a 1 Enneatype and they're identified with that, they're not going to see that, because all they're seeing is this. This is the total reality, not this. So it's not to say this isn't true from a certain perspective, but it's just not the whole picture. So the Enneagram is giving us a way to know what our fixation is, so that we can start seeing it as not ultimate, as a view that has a reality and has beauty to it, but also as suffering, so that we can start being freer and freer from the identification from that. So you'll see then each type has types next to them. So like for 1, there's the 2 and the 9 are right next to the 1. So when a person knows what their Enneatype is, then the next thing is, what is their predominant wing? That's called a wing, the number right next to that Enneatype. So that's going to flavor the person. That's why, like when I was telling you in the group that I was in with Sandra Maitre, like all of the 6s, we're all different, but now that I know all of them really well, I can see what's the same and I can see what's different. Part of what's different is some of them had a 5 wing and some had a 7 wing. So that's going to make it different. So when you feel like you know what your Enneatype is, then you'd look at, okay, which wing is the more prevalent for me? That flavors it, because it can make a big difference. I believe now that everybody has both wings. Like I have been working with my main wing for like 20 years, and I'm now starting to see the secondary wing, and like, oh my God, there's all this stuff to work, So, but really the place to start is with the one that's primary. And then there are the lines. So you can see the lines with the arrows. So I'll just continue to use 1 since I've been using that. The 1 has an arrow that goes to 4. Is that right? Let me see that. Yeah, so 4, so the arrow that it's going from the type, that goes to the person's, what's called the heart point or the soul child. So that means that when somebody with a 1 Enneatype is more free and not so identified with their personality, they're going to have more access to things from the 4. So this would be things like emotions and sensitivity, softness, and then also the 1 has the line to 7. So the 7 I always thought that 7 was the heart point of 1. Let me just see if that's right. Well, that's what this diagram says. Anyway, so that would then be the stress point. So for each Enneatype, like when you look at the Enneagram material online, you'll see the heart point and the stress point. The most useful thing to look at is the stress point. So what are you like under like really extreme stress where you're not yourself, like when you're really backed against the wall? That will tell you the stress point. So like I'll take 2. 2, the stress point, yeah, these arrows actually are backwards, so just imagine this in the other direction. It was done correctly from this chart. So the stress point for 2 is 8. So 2 is the helper. What's it called on here? The giver. So 2s are really about helping other people, and the core fixation is around I'm going to help others and not pay attention to myself. And here's the part that's where the ego self gets distorting it. That's how I'm sure that I'm going to be loved. Because if they need me, they'll love me. But what if they don't need me? That could be not good, because then what's my value? My value is helping others. What if no one needs me? Do I still have value? Maybe not. So you can see how that it's hard to let go of the Enneatype fixation because we're so used to doing that thing and getting goodies for it. Other people like it. Like when the perfectionist really does things accurately, they're on time, it's done well, it's done thoroughly, their boss loves them. There's goodies in the world for doing that. So then when we start challenging the Enneatype, it starts knowing that it's the Enneatype can help us be able to get freed up from that instead of thinking we're losing something. So anyway, the stress point, like for 2, the stress point is 8. So for a 2 being the helper, the giver, when a 2 goes to 8, 8 is on here called the protector. The 8 is a really big Enneatype, very, likes to dominate their environment. Strength, courage are a big part of 8. And 8 can be kind of explosive sometimes. There's a lot of energy and robustness to 8s. But when 2s go to 8 under stress, they look really not like a 2 normally would look. Very explosive, very attacking. And this is how we know, this is one of the ways to determine your Enneatype is by looking at the stress point for that Enneatype and how that affects how a person changes when they're really pushed against the wall under stress. So I'm just giving you this for those of you who don't know your Enneatype, ways that can help you get clear about what that is. So we all have a heart point and a stress point. And this is really what flavors the Enneatype. The last thing, I'll just touch on this briefly, is what's called the subtypes. So this is based on which instinctual drive is the strongest. And there's 3 instinctual drives that all mammals have: self-preservation, the sexual instinct, and the social, and especially the higher mammals who have a lot of, who are in groups have more of the social. So those of us who are, our top drive is the self-preservation instinct, will focus a lot of our attention. It's really about where our attention goes. So you might also see this in your things that are pulling you off of your meditation object. People with self-pres as their number 1 will focus a lot on things that support them in life. So it could be about where you live, or money, or food, or having things the way you want them, or it could be about rejecting those things. I'm not going to have money because that's noble. But there's a lot of attention that goes to that, and that's the refuge. The sexual instinct, it could either be around sexuality, or it's also called the one-on-one instinct. So people who have this as their top drive really prefer one-on-one relationships, and also the romantic relationship can be really important. So a lot of attention will go there into having the romantic relationship, or if one doesn't have one, having one, or even just really feeling a lot of comfort from one-on-one friendships. And then the third drive is the social. And people have that as number one. This is about the tribe. So like when, if you look at wolf packs, for example, the worst thing that can happen to a wolf is for it to be kicked out of the pack, because they aren't going to live very long. And you look at humans, this was often a punishment, was to kick the person out of their group. So the social instinct is about either being in a group, being in groups. There's a lot of comfort and sense of security in either being part of groups, or for some people, this will mean rejecting groups. But there's a lot of attention that goes on the social aspect of the tribe. So that's the last, that basically gives you the lay of the land in terms of what flavors a person's Enneatype. And this is why people with different Enneatypes, somebody could be a 5 with a 4 wing and a sexual subtype, or they could be a 5 with a 6 wing and a self-preservation type. So that's going to look very different. So this is why when you read the descriptions of your Enneatype, not everything in there is going to fit, because all of this flavors the Enneatype. So the way that we work with this then is in looking at the patterns when you're on the cushion. So, some of the things you saw just in the meditation we did here, you may be able to relate that to your Enneatype if you know what your Enneatype is. That's where it starts getting interesting. And by just knowing more of how, it's like we're trying to understand our software program. What is the software program that we came in with, and then that got programmed into us by our caregivers, by our family of origin and society, in terms of who we are and what we need to do to be okay and to be valued. And then going beyond that, really seeing it as a software program rather than as what we are. And that's the potential to really, by disidentifying from that more and more, we start being able to see our deeper nature, and know that that is more fundamentally what we are than the personality. So I'll stop there and see if there are questions and comments about the Enneagram and how to work with it. Katie.
Hi. I have like 8 billion questions, so I'll try to just ask one. But say like your home base is a 9 versus your heart point is a 9. Like do people at their heart point at a particular number sort of look different than people whose home base is that number at that number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So somebody like, say, the heart point of so for 9, the stress point for 9 is the stress point for 3 and the heart point for 6. So like when a 6 is really in a good place and getting freed up from their personality, they'll be more easygoing. The fear is going to be reduced. There's going to be more of a relaxed vibe, but there's still a 6. So yeah, we don't ever become that Enneatype. Yeah. It's just more of, and we're not trying to. It's not like we're striving to do that, but there can be work that we do to reclaim some of what was lost of the heart point as part of the spiritual path. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So it is fixed. You said kind of earlier that, So this type is fixed. You don't shift.
You don't
through them.
shift. No, and there isn't an Enneatype that's better than others. It's not like we're trying, I mean, just to say this, because in some of these schemas, there are ones we're trying to get to. So we're not, and none are better than the others. And we come in with that, and that is what we are. But there are levels of development for each Enneatype. And this is, again, on the Enneagram Institute website. If you feel that you know what your type is, you can go and see, like, what does a fully enlightened one look like versus a psychotic one, But no, they don't change. In my understanding, there are certain understandings of the Enneagram that says, oh, we have all of them. That's not going to help you wake up. So that's the useful thing about really feeling into which one really is the truth for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you by chance know if any teachers looked into the connection between Enneagram and astrology? Because at some point I kind of I personally did a deep dive into Vedic astrology, and then I did my Enneagram afterwards, and I found a lot of interesting parallels.
Interesting.
So yeah,
Yeah, I
curious.
don't know. I don't know if anybody does that. I mean, with astrology, it's, there's so many planets that we can't just say, like, use the sun sign, So I don't know of anybody where they've done an equivalent of like a certain type and a certain sun sign, but I'm sure there are overlaps. If you look at somebody's chart as a whole, you're going to see that that person looks like this Enneatype. Like somebody who really knew astrology might be able to make it an accurate guess as to what that person's Enneatype is. So there would have to be a relationship, because both of those are ways to understand your own software and what you came in with in your karma.
Yeah, I think like the notion of karma, kind of like what you come in with.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are also correlations between something like the Myers-Briggs and the Enneatype. It's not a one-to-one, but for those of you who know that. Yeah. Other questions?
You say that it's a tool to use to dissolve or digest the personality material. How is it used that way?
Yeah, so this is where the on and the off the cushion practice really can work together in a powerful way. So, and I have free talks on Dharma Seed about working with personality material. So you're welcome to take a look at that, as well as the Enneagram. And I'm giving a talk at Rick Hansen's Wednesday in March on working with personality material. So when we're seeing the patterns on the cushion, like, I'll pick maybe 6. So say that somebody is seeing anxiety patterns a lot, and this is taking them off of their meditation object, and they know they're an Enneatype 6, which has fear as its core, one of its core characteristics. Then this could be really interesting to let's see, I'm trying to think of an example of somebody that I've worked with. Okay, so with the type 6, there can be phobic, where people feel fearful. This is like Woody Allen. Imagine Woody Allen. Or counterphobic. So like firefighters, mountain climbers, where they're challenging the fear. I don't have fear, and I'm going to show I don't by confronting the fear. So there's 2 different ways that the fear comes out with 6s, and a lot of 6s have some of both. So, but, seeing that, say that, there's a way of seeing in the meditation that the anxiety is one of the patterns, knowing then the Enneatype and going back to, what is this pattern really doing? Like, what are its origins? Like, say somebody grew up in a household that wasn't very safe. It would be good to have a fear pattern and or a confrontation pattern, depending on the situation. Because if I'm, fear is basically curiosity, a distortion of curiosity. Again, it comes from something that is pure, and it's distorted. So as this little 5-year-old is going around their home and it's not safe, having that fear is going to be skillful. It's going to help avoid the bad thing. So often, I'd say 100% of the time, if we see the patterns that we're working with on the cushion that are taking us off, these are the building blocks of the ego self. So some of these are circumstantial, some of these we came in with. But if we can feel into that and start feeling the origins of these and what they're doing for us, usually that starts digesting it. Like, this is why it's compulsive, because it was needed at some point in our lives. And if we can have compassion for that and really work with it with the different meditation practices, that can start getting digested, and the Enneagram can provide insight into that. So really, to me, the most powerful way to do it is to work with the patterns you're seeing on the cushion and then combine that with the Enneatype. So say somebody has a fear pattern and in their life they would like to say they're single and they want to date, but they've got so much anxiety that they can't ask anyone out for it. They can't like somebody on the app. It's too scary. Well, that might be just a stretch. Okay, I'm going to feel how scary it is to do that, or to say yes if somebody asks them out, whatever. I'm going to feel that, and I'm going to know the origins of it. Something bad could happen what if I ask someone out and they say no? What if I go out and it doesn't work out? And start challenging it. And like, they go on the date, they feel how afraid they are. They have compassion for ourselves. And then we do a little experiment to stretch out of that pattern. And so then it's not so compulsive. And so this is how, when we're working it both on and off the cushion, we're freeing those patterns up to where they're not driving us and driving our behavior. But we're doing it with compassion instead of doing it with like brute force. Any other questions? Yeah.
I took the test, the Enneagram Institute test a couple weeks ago, and my scores were 3, 5, and 9, and they were all about the same, 22 or 23, so fairly low scores, but they were all basically the same, the top 3.
Yeah.
And reading through the characteristics and things, some of them indicated to me, some of them didn't indicate so much. But I was wondering, do you have any suggestions on how to sort of narrow it down to,
Yeah, one of the things I've been working with people is looking at the top 3, and sometimes there'll be 2 of them that have a line to each other that are stress point or heart point. So 3 and 9 have a line. So that would make me think that it's more likely that it's one of those 2 than 5.
Okay.
So was there one of those 2 that felt more likely to you?
Not
Or?
sure. I'll go back and look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes what happens is that, like, when I'm working with people, I'll see that they answered questions from, say, their stress point, like at times when they've been under stress, where like a 9 let's see, okay, you had 3 and 9. So a 3 who's under stress will look like a 9. So 3 is the performer who's really good at accomplishing things. I mean, we are in a 3 culture. This is the whole world is 3 now, really, but the United States is a 3 culture. So the value is for getting a lot done, and 3s do get a lot done. The problem is that there's identification then that I have value because I perform, I get stuff done. What if I stopped? Like, what if I retire? Do I have value, or what if I don't do it quite right? So that's, again, each Enneatype has their thing. 3s under pressure will sometimes just get so overwhelmed that they'll just like stop doing things, and they will just get kind of befuddled. And it's so not like a 3, So that's how the stress point would look. Conversely, like Obama, I believe, was a 9. A lot of people thought Obama was a 3 because he did accomplish a lot. But remember when he first came into office, his whole council of, he wanted to have people who disagreed with him at the table and have it all be, he was trying to invite people in collaboratively and to do it as together. That, not that 3s don't collaborate, they do, but that is much more 9ish. Like it's the peacemaker. So you could see he accomplished a ton. So he could look like a 3, but really the core was the 9.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's
Yeah,
a way
maybe.
to look at the heart point also. But sometimes people will answer and they'll have in the top 3 one of the lines, and that can narrow it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the metrics?
Metrics?
Yeah, like how, like the in terms of the origin story. I know it makes sense to me that it's connected for you with Buddhism and psychology, but I'm curious about the origins of the Sufism, and if there's been any discussion about the discipline in terms of the origin of the development and the questions, like how, as a psychologist, how do you come up with the questions without factor analysis or some sort of regression theory that allows you to look at the development?
Yeah, I don't know how Rizzo, the people on the Enneagram Institute website are Rizzo and Hudson. They're well known. And the best book that I would recommend to start with is The Wisdom of the Enneagram by them. I think it's the best starting place, but I have a few other books that I think are good too. So I have no idea how they came up with it. I don't feel that it's accurate that people are always the number 1. But everybody I've worked with has felt that they were in the top 3. So to me, taking it isn't imposing on you. It's more like a narrowing. I don't know what the psychometrics are.
Right.
It's not, and from the Sufi path, really it came from the Sarmoon Brotherhood, which is even prior to, I don't even know if they really were totally Sufis. That's all shrouded in mystery. So there's nothing in modern psychology that came from them.
Okay. And then also, I can't help but think about the context, right? So you could have 3 kids in the same family, born very close together. They're very different personalities. They come into the world with what they have. But what about the attachment and the relational field and how those impose on the Enneagram and personality, and how do you work with those in your practice and with people?
Yeah, well, that's all, part of working with the psychological material. And I really feel that people going to therapists is a great tool for the path. So part of working with all that is actually working with a therapist or working with it psychologically, not using spiritual tools. To me, the tools of psychology have their own merit as a standalone and as a companion to the spiritual technologies that I'm talking about. So, but the Enneagram theory is that, that if you had, say, 3 kids that all had 3 different 8, 9, and 1, and they encountered similar circumstances, they would use their go-to response to handle that. So the 9, I've seen this in students that I have where they had siblings. The 9 in a family, say there was abuse or something, the 9 was going to try and keep the peace among everybody. The 8 was going to confront the person who was doing the abuse and fight back. And the 1 was going to try and make the home as perfect as possible to keep the blow-ups from happening. So they're all dealing with a similar environment with using different approaches to that.
Yeah, I could see how that would map on to lots of other kind of codependency, drama triangle sort of things.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm sure there are correlates in psychology that if somebody's working with a therapist who knew about those would be more tools that would be helpful to work with. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we're just about at the end here. So I'd love to get some feedback on, like, was this useful? Is this something that you all feel you can apply in your path, or is this like too much for a short 2-hour thing? Or, I'd love to get some feedback because we're thinking about doing a day long. So we have 3 day longs planned in the next through the end of the year, and 2 of them will be on 2 of the meditation practices for me to come in. And we're thinking of doing one on working with personality material would be in the morning, and then the afternoon would be on the Enneagram, where people could come in even not knowing their Enneatype, but having done the test and get some guidance on that and be able to, kind of digest this a little more and roll up their sleeves on that. So I'd love to get some feedback on, do you think that would be useful, or, what's your take on it? Because I've done this as Dharma talks lots of times, both of these topics, but having a whole day to work with it would really provide kind of a level of depth where people could, come in with their patterns. We do several meditations, so you could really be tracking the patterns you're seeing and kind of work with it with more depth. So I'm seeing some nodding.
Yeah, I like the density, and I think what I was craving was more embodied understanding of the patterns and how they play out.
Right. So that's part of what a longer span of time would give us. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been a joy to be with you all, and I wish that your understanding of your software program and personality material will allow you greater freedom to know your deeper nature. Good night.
I actually